A yellow and black background with red blossoms placed here and there reads Tiger Talks, a series of community conversations with writers and creatives to celebrate Alice Wong's 2022 memoir, Year of the Tiger. To the right of the wording is the cover of Alice's book, which is yellow with red blossoms and a red tiger climbing down the right side of the cover. It reads Year of the Tiger, An Activist's Life by Alice Wong. A small white box below the cover reads ASL and closed captioning provided. The next slide has a yellow and black background with red blossoms, which headlines Tiger Talks. Below are the three sponsor logos, one for the Disability Visibility Project, one for the Disability Intersectionality Summit, and one for the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first event in our Tiger Talk series, which is a very exciting collaboration between the Disability Visibility Project, Disability and Intersectionality Summit, and the organization that I am joining you from today, the Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State University. My name is Emily Badix, and I am a white woman in my late 30s. I've got some very curly hair, and it's very tiny and hard to see, but I have to point out that I'm wearing my tiger print t-shirt in honor of this occasion. I have just a few access notes before we kick this program off. You can access captioning via the CC button in Zoom, but if you prefer a more customized option, a slightly more reliable option, you can visit the stream text link at tinyurl.com/Longmore captions. We are only going to use the chat function today to share some key links with you, but we invite you to use the Q&A space as if it is a chat room. So feel free to share your reactions. You can write any questions for our presenters today. They may take a peek at it. They may not, depending on how comfortable they are with multitasking. But I will definitely share the Q&A feature and all of the dialogue that happens there with the panelists afterwards and with all of you. So if that space is not open to you while listening to the panel, you'll have access to it afterwards once we clean it up. We are doing some live tweeting today. If you want to share about the event or participate in dialogue there, we're using the hashtags hashtag Tiger Talks and hashtag Year of the Tiger. Lastly, if you are excited about all the books that we're going to give away today, that's going to happen at the end of the program. So stay tuned for that. We are so pleased that Alice Wong honored us once again with this collaboration with her new book out. And we are really grateful for all of the new connections that we are making, thanks to Alice and the vision that she had for this series. I hope you will join us for our future Tiger Talks as well. And with that, I will pass it to a wonderful collaborator who has helped make this series possible, Sandy Ho. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. My name is Sandy Ho, and I am the founder of the Disability and Intersectionality Summit. I'd like to provide a audio description of myself. I am a disabled Asian American woman with dark purple streaked hair. I'm wearing rainbow glasses and a white button up. My Zoom background is blurred behind me, and I'm holding up the paperback copy of Year of the Tiger, An Activist's Life by Alice Wong, which we're so excited to be celebrating with everyone here today. I'm on the unceded territory of the Massachusetts people, and we are also thrilled that you all can join us in celebrating the launch of Alice Wong's memoir. Today's community book launch and the 3 events to follow have always been a part of Alice's Tiger Plan. Whether you know of her work from the Disability Visibility Project or her Twitter presence as part of the team behind #RipTheVote, or from the anthology she edited, Disability Visibility first-person stories from the 21st century, or of course her most recent and very exciting collaboration with Jen White Johnson and Amy Hemray, the Society of Disabled Oracles, which will be linked into the chat. We all know, right, that for Alice, disability community is the way. Following Alice's illness and her ICU stay earlier this summer, it became even more important for this book to be launched from the disability community and for all of us to come together in this very auspicious Year of the Tiger to celebrate our big cat friend, writer, mischief maker, and disabled oracle, Alice Wong. We are very grateful to the writers who will be featured throughout the series of community Tiger Talks. And so without further ado, let's dive in, whiskers first. So I'm passing it over to you, Jonny.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited and honored to be the moderator of Tiger Talk #1. I am a Asian American man in my early 30s. I'm wearing a navy button-down t-shirt with a white t-shirt underneath. And I'm sitting in front of a fireplace mantle with a lovely pathos behind me. Zooming in from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. A little bit about myself as a self-intro. I'm a writer, graphic novelist, and television writer. I wrote and illustrated the graphic novel Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too, the essay collection Goodbye Again, and I was a writer for Netflix's BoJack Horseman, as well as an upcoming project. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce my two co-conspirators for this hour, Esmé and Stephanie. Esmé, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Esmé Weijun Wang. I am in San Francisco on unceded Ohlone land. I am a Taiwanese American woman, about 39 years of age. I am wearing a black tank dress with a very fancy pink bow headpiece on top of my black curly hair. Behind me is the bed that I lie on a lot during the day, as well as some nice floral green wallpaper. And I am very excited to be here today. Thank you so much.
Stephanie? Oh.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Fu. I'm a journalist. And the author of the book, What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma. I am an Asian woman with very large glasses, and you can kind of see that I don't have tiger shirt, but I have a leopard shirt and a black sweater. And I am sitting in a pretty empty, boring gray room in Queens, which is the stolen land of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples.
Excellent. I'm so excited to talk about Alice's book and to celebrate it and to celebrate both of your brilliant books as well, and just to talk. But I thought, as a way to begin this session, because this is a book talk after all, Stephanie and I had chosen a couple excerpts from Alice's Year of the Tiger to read or to present. Stephanie, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first? Do you have a preference?
I think you should go first. I'll go second.
Okay. So I'm just going to read a little excerpt from the essay titled About Time. For anyone who has a copy of the book with them already, it's on I'm starting on page 261. And it's about the writing process. Procrastination is a creative practice It sets me on autopilot, allowing other parts of my brain to refine my random, undefined ideas. Procrastination is also how I get my sicko kicks. I'll never be an MMA fighter or someone who drives a car at 100 miles per hour, but I can live recklessly by feeling the pressure of an impending deadline of doom. Homework was never my strong suit, and many a night I stayed up frantically finishing something. The internal Dr. Rabbit / Mr. Turtle tension pushes and pulls, operating with an unknowable logic and rhythm that I embrace rather than fight against. Whether it's a blog post, an op-ed, or a book chapter, I interrogate myself during this embryonic stage of writing. What do I want to say that is unique? Is this what I want to do right now? What are the risks in revealing another piece of myself to the world? What messages do I want to share with the reader? What do I want to learn and gain from this experience? When is my next snack break? These questions are set on repeat as I decide what to include and write in this very memoir. Intention and timing matter. There are personal stories that will remain dormant and private forever. There are stories that need to simmer and evolve. There are stories that should be told by other people instead of me. After a healthy amount of procrastination, it's euphoric when words pour out of me, dribbling, splattering in messy directions like a melted hot fudge sundae. Tap, tap, tappity tap. Swirls of very important thoughts and whipped useless blather soak up the page. More tapping, more deleting, cutting and pasting, the rush fades, and this is when the more work begins, editing. In putting together this book, I realized that life is one never-ending edit. Sounds like a cheesy metaphor, but it's true. In writing about my life, editing is time travel, collapsing, folding, expanding time, gathering disparate wispy threads into neat chapters and sections, memories rearranged, pulled apart, de-emphasized, secrets and fears erased in between drafts only to emerge again as tangents to be deleted or set aside. Invisible track changes that reframe a narrative only to be solidified, trashed, and reborn. Filtering truths until the most essential elements remain. M-dashes that link, ellipses that prolong. A constant telling and retelling until the act itself threatens to weaken the blood and guts of a piece. Editing is a dialogue with demons, ancestors, and the future, a witchy dark art that summons the forces of the universe into legibility. Imposter syndrome and internalized ableism are subjects that I've talked about ad nauseum to the point when it bores me, yet as I wonder, who wants to read another piece about writing? Thousands of books have already been written on the subject by actual literary, scholarly, MFA degreed, award-winning people. What's so original about my hot take on it? I have no practical advice, nor do I speak from a body of literature on this topic. I am not well read, nor do I extol a particular daily writing routine. Marinated in procrastination ooze, I reject the assumption that you need to exercise a particular writing discipline, which is entrenched in middle-class whiteness and non-disabledness. If a goal of reaching a certain number of written words per day works for you, great. If certain practices and tools help you, great. If not, there are so many other ways to write that should be celebrated and demystified so that people won't feel inadequate, quote unquote lazy, or unproductive, or the most pernicious of insinuations, unlike a real writer. Writing less in compressed time periods or in an atypical manner does not make the work any less. It is still work. Writing will always require practice, whether it manifests on the page, in scribbles and doodles, or in your mind. Death and deep uncertainty are realities that disabled and chronically ill people know intimately. Living in a disabled body, where getting through the day and taking a shower are Olympic gold medal worthy achievements, adds a layer to the push-pull of writing. All this is tempered by the fact that disabled life, with its unpredictable crises, can append and throw the best laid writing plans into a dumpster fire. Privilege is being able to keep a prescribed timetable without fear of paying the rent, being in pain or becoming sick, losing healthcare, and taking care of your family and yourself. The sense of urgency of being in a world that values speed and quantity and inhibiting this watery sack of bones informs how, when, and why I write. Ever since I bought my first journal so I could become my own historian, writing was an act to preserve myself against forces that try to diminish and distort me, Emily Jungmin Yoon wrote in a 2021 essay about Asian American identity for The Cut. I do not write for representation's sake or to satisfy an audience's hunger for authentic intersectional stories. I write when the spirit moves me. I write because it's fun, pleasurable, and dangerous. I write because it is my chosen form of resistance, self-preservation, and defiance. I write plainly and openly from the heart. Every organism starts decaying from the moment of birth. Reaching my fourth year of the tiger lunar cycle, I wonder if my attitude towards time is wrong. I shouldn't treat time as a fleeting commodity or a scarce luxury I must capture and hoard as it slips through my clawed, bony fingers. The feat of getting to this age and being able to tell my story should be liberating rather than a too fast, too furious, a tiger's tail race against mortality. Because only death wins in the end. Slow or fast, people can find me in these words and the spaces in between long after I am gone. Once again, that was from the essay About Time from Alice's new book, Year of the Tiger.
So the selection that I chose to share actually echoes a little bit of what you just read, Jonny, because I think what's so exciting and awesome about this book is that it challenges the idea of what a memoir could be. It's pretty audacious in the very content that she uses. And one thing that I was really into as a podcast producer and former journalist at places like This American Life is that she included transcripts of interviews and podcasts that she did. And one of them I wanted to share because it was funny and brave, with the actor and comedian W. Kamau Bell. He has a podcast about how Denzel Washington is the best actor of all time. And in that podcast, they were talking about Denzel in The Bone Collector. And this is a short exchange that they had that is represented in the book on pages 145 and 146, if you would like to follow along. So give me 1 second.
You still see that many movies where the main character is the disabled person.
Yeah, and I think it certainly is, as far as for Denzel as an actor, because it's a pretty big acting stretch because he's known for his walk. We talk about it, and even this movie, it's like the movie goes, you're not going to see him walk a lot, so they gave him the walk. The very first scene is his sort of Denzel walk. Mm-hmm. And, so he's known for, and so to play a character where he's confined to the bed for the whole time until the very end, spoiler alert, it's I'm assuming that was part of the reason he took the acting challenge on.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is where, some of my friends in the disability community and, we get a little annoyed that, non-disabled people is Oscar bait.
Oh, yes.
Right? I mean, so many characters with disabilities who are, featured in movies are ending up, being this really amazing stretch for these actors. And, the challenge, what is it like to be quadriplegic? And what is it like to have to not move your legs, when you're acting? How can you do that? How do you embody something so alien and so impossible to really be like? I mean, that in itself, I think, is somewhat insulting, where all these non-disabled actors are just lauded for pushing themselves, like My Left Foot, that last movie with Stephen Hawking.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
there was just a lot of discussion about, it's really to serve non-disabled people and their kind of quest for a challenge.
It's funny. So basically, Alice, what you just did, and I just want to highlight this, I said Denzel stretched by doing this movie, and then you called bullshit on that. Thank you, Alice.
Well,
I appreciate that.
Incredible. I mean, I love that. I love that she included that entire transcript in the book. And I think these are both perfect segues to talk about this brilliant achievement and this brilliant book. Particularly, I was interested in calling this session The Form of Memory because I think across the three of you, Esmé, Stephanie, and Alice, your works all embody this this quality of memory, of memoir, of sort of writing about yourself and your space. But they all take very different forms, and I think they are in conversation with each other in a really cool way. And I was wondering if you would both want to talk both about Alice's book and the form it took, and what was kind of very groundbreaking and non-traditional and very Alice about it, as well as both of your works and how you thought about specifically the form that your books would take, and what kind of challenges you faced with thinking about that, and how you wanted to challenge the idea of memoir or of essay and these types of collections.
Do you mind if I speak first?
Of course, go ahead.
Okay, so one thing that I was really excited about regarding Year of the Tiger when I first heard about it was that Alice was incredibly influenced by zines and zine culture. So I, which not a lot of people know about, and I just realized I didn't introduce myself at all in the beginning regarding the books I've published. I published a novel, The Border of Paradise, and a essay collection called The Collected Schizophrenias. So got that. But I really connected with Alice's idea of having this book, this memoir, be a lot like a zine, because I really saw the kinds of things I did in my old zines, which I started back in 1997 all the way to 2003. I saw this interesting way of putting together conversations and comics and illustrations and all of these interesting things that normally don't get put in a memoir. And I think that when I wanted to write The Collected Schizophrenias, having done all of that work with zines, I really brought that with me. A lot of the memoir element of The Collected Schizophrenias came from literally thousands of pages of live journal entries that I had saved as a PDF. And so it was just wading through those memories and trying to put them together as essays. In the United States, The Collected Schizophrenias is marketed as an essay collection. In the UK, it's marketed as a memoir. So in some ways, these things are very fluid. But yeah, I really connected with the zine element of Year of the Tiger.
Yeah, I played a segment of a podcast because I thought that, again, like the multimedia aspect of it was very cool, which does speak to the zine aspect. And I love zines, and zines were also my introduction into the world of journalism. But I think what was also cool about that was that, you know, a traditional memoirist might write about like their own advocacy work and write about the way that they had to challenge ableist assumptions. And I love that Alice just proved that she's been doing that forever, and she didn't need to say it. She just let her powerful body of work and the conversation she's been having her whole life say it for her. And I also loved, you know, Alice would be a great podcaster because she writes for the ear, in my opinion. It's very colloquial, it's very conversational, it's very funny, and just easy to read because it's like a friend by you. And I think sometimes I would get insecure about my own writing because I don't have an MFA in writing. I am not like a classically trained writer. My writing experience comes from writing for the ear, for radio stories. And so it was always important to me to have my voice be very direct, to the point, and easy to understand, because you can't rewind a radio show. So it has to be very, very clear the very first time it goes out. And I think, I worried that my book wasn't going to be fancy and flowery enough. It wouldn't have that MFA writing voice when it came out. But I think a lot of people instead resonated with how authentic I was. And a lot of people have said that it sounds like a friend is talking to them as they're reading my book. And I very much felt that exact feeling as I was reading Year of the Tiger. Like, it was just having like a 3-hour-long conversation with a really funny, genuine, authentic friend who was just being very mischievous and making funny jokes at me and telling me about her day.
Which in another way is something that I think people wouldn't expect from the book. I think that people who are maybe not familiar with Alice or her body of work would expect this kind of long lecture about disability, and instead you're getting these, whimsical things about why she likes cats and, the spit cup and various elements that are very much a part of her life. I mean, disability informs all of our lives, but it's not a constant disability. It's not just this thing that drones on and on. There's other stuff too, and I love that about the book.
Right, which is what an organic conversation would be like. It's like, my mom, some disability, my cat, some disability. Don't you love cake? So, yeah.
I do love cake.
Who doesn't love
As do
cake?
I loved how she also talked about this this idea of like not writing for like a trauma narrative or like a disability narrative, and really exploding that idea of like avoiding that sort of flattening and avoiding kind of the box that one would assume sort of a quote unquote disability book would exist in. And I found likewise, both of your works, I think, did that as well. I think there's so much, both your works were so expansive and really spoke to kind of like the full individuals and people that you are, and kind of like the wholeness of it. And I think like ostensibly, Stephanie, your book is about complex PTSD, and Esmé, your book is about schizoaffective disorder. But those are just one part of it. And I was wondering if you could talk about kind of what types of, I guess, mental illness narratives you were trying to keep in mind as you were writing, and what things you wanted to avoid, or what things you wanted to kind of explode, or just kind of throw out the window, and how specifically you approached building the book in terms of either accepting or rejecting those different ideas.
So the collective schizophrenia is very much about my life with schizoaffective disorder, but it also gets into all of the physical illness and physical disability that started in my life in about 2013. I talk in the book about how it was diagnosed as chronic Lyme disease, or as dysautonomia, or as fibromyalgia, and all of these different things. So I tried to include both the physical and mental aspects of disability in my book as much as possible. But what I found was that when journalists wanted to write about the book, they really had a lot invested in this author overcomes disability. narrative. Like they would actually use that as the headline, like Esmé Weijun Wang overcomes disability to triumph, whatever. And there would be times when I would actually write to the editor, because usually it's not the journalist who makes the headline, and say, could you please change the headline? Because this is not a headline that I would ever choose for myself. I don't overcome disability to do anything. I do things, and I also have disability. It's kind of riding alongside me like a sidecar on a motorcycle. So that was one of the things that I ran into with promoting the book.
Yeah, I think in writing my book, what I struggled with in reading other books about trauma. Well, I mean, first of all, so complex PTSD, my complex PTSD is primarily through extreme child abuse and neglect. So when I would read stories like mine, it would focus entirely almost on the child abuse. And it would just be like this really difficult to read, painful journey through just excruciating child abuse. And then the recovery period at the end would be so brief that I was like, that didn't really give me the tools that I came here looking for in terms of helping myself. And then the other thing was that reading books about complex PTSD specifically were often very dry, very clinical, and they would all focus on like the brokenness of the person, and here they are broken, and look at all the crazy, terrible things that they're doing. And I tried this treatment on them, and then they got better. And I just thought that was very oversimplified, extremely dehumanizing. And often reading books like that made me feel more broken, more bad about myself, more crazy, because every single person depicted in this was, in my view, like a monster. And so I definitely wanted to provide a three-dimensional, well-rounded narrative. So I made the child abuse part of my book just the first fifth of the book, just the first 50 pages. And I actually put a disclaimer in the front that said, you can skip it if you want. This is triggering, it's gonna be painful, so go ahead, just like, if it's really that painful, go ahead. And then the majority of it was the story of healing as an adult. And again, part of it being humanized, my editor, I have the story, my editor really wanted me to take out some of the fart jokes that I put in there, of like me farting violently in a corner and having a panic attack at a party because I was like so lactose intolerant. And she was like, there's too many farts. And I was like, no, it has to have all the farts because it has to be funny. Like this book has to have moments of levity, because having complex PTSD isn't all sad and blah, miserable the whole time. It's complex PTSD often is hilarious. It's a ridiculous condition. And that's what I really appreciated about Alice's book too, is that there is so much levity in it. There's so much joy. There's so much funniness, because disability is not a tragic thing to have. It can be joyful, it can be pleasurable, it can make you more empathetic and powerful in many ways. And she celebrates those things.
There's something about your book and Alice's book and my book that I think about, which is that I think it can be easy to forget that the authors are all still alive, and we're all still living our lives, and we're all still farting and joking and being fashionable, or trying to be fashionable. One thing I really appreciated about your book, Stephanie, that you didn't mention is that at the very end of that first page where you say you can skip that part if you want, it also says like it has a happy ending. And I also have been diagnosed with CPTSD, as you know, and we have talked about it a lot. But I found that so helpful and so healing, and it enabled me actually to read that beginning section. But I can imagine that maybe like journalists writing about your book would be most interested in that first fifth of the book because it was sensational and it would capture the mind of America.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did you have that too? Yes, journalists, there are stories, there are reviews of my book that come out, and it's
well,
just
like the
all
New York Times,
child abuse.
the New York Times review of my book, actually, you know how New York Times book reviews tend to be mostly positive, and at the very end they twist and like have like a slightly negative thing. So their slightly negative thing about my book was that it wasn't like gruesome enough, that it didn't have enough like gory details. And and I thought that was really interesting because it's like, why do I need to provide you with that?
The New York Times review of my book, let me read you the headline of it. Look what you've turned us into, the roots of women's shame. Like,
I'm covering my face in horror.
Thanks, New York Times.
Well, I mean, Stephanie, as like a former journalist or current journalist, but former working for NPR, can you talk a little, or can you both kind of give your thoughts about like the way that kind of like journalism as a field and as a discipline is kind of embedded in, let's say that like the ableism of our like culture and these kind of ableist narratives, and the kind of work to be done to try to undo that, or just maybe give or because I'm curious, like if you could give me sort of like a zoomed out idea of why like journalism as like an arm of ableism in a way exists.
Well, in one really large way, it is that it is very hard to be a journalist if you are disabled. Especially things like investigative journalism. You have to like travel. You have to be ready to be in like a war-torn country at any moment. You have to be available to interview people. I always think about this article that I read about the author of Seabiscuit. I believe her name is Laura Hillenbrand. She wrote about having chronic fatigue syndrome or myalgic encephalitis. Sorry, I said that incorrectly. But she had this condition that made it very hard for her to do her journalism about Seabiscuit, which is what she wanted to write about. And the article was so interesting because as a disabled writer, I am so interested in the workarounds that other journalists and writers and people who do reporting use if they're disabled. And so that piece was all about her lying in bed surrounded by these really old newspapers and doing interviews over the phone. And as many of us know, Seabiscuit was a huge bestseller and it became a huge movie. And so not to say that all disabled people have to be superstars to be respected, but I really get a lot from that, knowing that she was able to do that kind of work. And to get back to what you were asking earlier, I think there is a lot of ableism in journalism simply because there aren't a lot of disabled journalists. It's hard to be a journalist if you're disabled.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this culture in journalism where you just have to work super hard all the time, and you got to grind, and you got to like always be on call. And after I quit my full-time job at This American Life, I had some pretty serious chronic pain issues and health problems in terms of my hypermobility, which prevented me from sitting at a desk for 8 hours. And I had like crippling migraines, and I could not do that job now with the body that I have because of how much they demanded me to work. And I think another thing about journalism that is difficult, that is just entwined with ableism in general, and I think it's part laziness and just like a lack of creativity, is that like in a lot of good journalism stories, there's always a conflict, right? And I think that people are used to the disability itself being the conflict. So like you have to overcome the deafness, you have to overcome the mental illness, when often it isn't even necessarily the disability that's causing pain so much as it is the society around us. It's the medical system that's not allowing us to get help for it. It's like the stigma surrounding it. It's the bias. It's, you know, the inability to work in a capitalist society that doesn't let you have a 40-hour work week, or isn't making accommodations.
It's the DSM whatever that doesn't have CPTSD in it.
Yeah, exactly. It's the society that's preventing us, instead of pointing at the evil, which is the system that isn't allowing, the CPS system that isn't protecting children from child abuse, or the mental health care system that isn't allowing us to get the treatment that we need. It's just like, oh, it's you battling your crazy mind alone. And that's just not the story. It's a boring story. It's overtold, and we need to focus on stories that involve systems as villains instead of our minds.
And I think what I love about all three of your books are you all do that so well, and so like humanly and like groundedly. Is that a word?
It is now.
Great, perfect. But I think what I was so blown away by was in talking about kind of these systemic things. None of like the stories that all three of you told ever felt kind of dry and clinical. It felt very humane and emotional, and very, I as a TV writer, very character driven. Even though you're not characters, you're people. But I was wondering if you could talk specifically about that, how to take those big ideas and how you both were able to present them in ways that made them really kind of easy to understand, and that were filled with sort of like narrative and drama, and weren't just kind of like these clinical textbook type things. And I think I'm going to also loop in the question of Esmé, I know you worked as a researcher at Stanford, and Stephanie, your background as a journalist. I think both of your backgrounds, and Alice's background as a sociologist, all of your backgrounds exist sort of in these, I guess, these like kind of academic-y spaces, these kind of informational spaces. And I'm also curious about how you kind of meld that with your writing and kind of the goals of your writing. That was a long question.
Do you want to go first, Stephanie?
Well, in terms of the academic-y spaces, yeah, pushing back to keep in the fart jokes, absolutely critical. And just, yeah, I mean, like somebody in the Q&A mentioned the crossword. I just want to like shout out Alice to putting in things like crosswords, comics, illustrations, lovely big iconic images like this in the book, and text messages and memes. I think that makes this book very unclinical. And I think the other thing that makes it very unclinical that I also used in my book is scenes. So as a TV writer, I'm sure you know, like, and radio is the same. We tell stories with scenes. So it's all about, like, it's not about just telling you the ideas, like the big abstract ideas. It should all be coming out in a scene with people talking and conflict and characters and setting. So that's what I tried to do in my book, is every big idea that I wanted to convey about hallucinogenics or EMDR or about systemic abuse, whatever, I told it through a scene that I had lived through. And Alice does the exact same thing in her book.
Yeah, I am always interested when this is not advised, but I sometimes look at the reviews that people write of my books in like Goodreads or whatever. And I see the essays that people most love or most relate to. And usually they're the essays that are told like a story, as Stephanie was just saying. So, for example, Perdition Days, which is an essay about the time I experienced a rare delusion in which I thought I was dead. I include this scene where I'm dressed up and ready to go for my electroconvulsive therapy consult. And I'm getting ready to go in the garage, and these two guys turn their heads to look at me because I was hot. And then in the book, I say something like, too bad, because sucks to be you, because I'm a rotting corpse, or something like that. And so just including, I think, stories, but also including humor is a major component. It's very much in this book. Humor is all over this book. I think in part because we're very funny people. But also I think that when you're really struggling, humor is one of the things that can keep you going.
Yes. And Esmé, what's coming to my mind too, especially when you talk about that, is like the writing that you do about fashion and describing all your very cute outfits and the work that you did in fashion. It's not all just disability all the time. There's all these other elements of your personality and the things that you love and that are important to you in this book that make you so identifiable and three-dimensional and human.
That's incredible. Those were such great answers. I also, since we're kind of already astoundingly close to the end of the hour, which is so sad because I could talk to you both all day. I wanted to ask you both about kind of this idea of just like finding community and being able to connect with other people who have gone through similar experiences that you have, and specifically the idea of like the work of a book in terms of either, well, probably both, kind of connecting to a community, but also helping you find community. I think something that I've always been astounded and kind of really touched by with my own work is people reaching out and saying like, this really spoke to me, and this, I didn't know other people felt this way, and these emotions, I'd never been able to articulate them before. But the thing that I'm always touched by is like, I realize that I write these in order to find other people, or to kind of, it's a shot in the dark, sort of to search for, like, it's a hope that other people might share these feelings or thoughts. And so the book both becomes sort of like a celebration of a community, but also a way to connect to a community, or to kind of connect yourself to a community. And I was wondering kind of what both of your most recent books have kind of done in kind of the work of your life of existing within community.
So for me, community has always been something that I've searched for. I've always felt weird and alien and like I didn't belong. And even though technology changes, the need for community does not change. So back in 1997, I was stapling zines with a long-armed stapler at Kinko's and getting like 30 packages a day of mixtapes and letters and all these things. And then that turned into blogging or like LiveJournal, and that took up a number of years. And then that turned into things like Twitter and Instagram. And I just saw today that the Disabled Oracle material that has been in the works for a while has started to appear on Instagram. And I feel that pull that is in me to want to be a part of that community that sees something that I recognize and wants to say like, oh, that's me too. Let's talk about it. And so I think even though, like I said, it doesn't take weeks to get a response the way it did when I did zines anymore. I can just get a DM in like a day. But that search for community, whether it's queer community, whether it's, you know, community of people who are people of color, intersections of those things, there's always that need for community. And I think we find a way.
Yeah, I think what I lacked most direly when I was first diagnosed was community. So when I was first diagnosed with complex PTSD, I didn't know anyone else with CPTSD. And I couldn't find any stories about it. I couldn't find any first-person narratives about it. And that was so isolating and lonely, especially because I knew the power that first-person narratives had. I mean, that was my day job, you know. And so that's why I set out to write my book, is because if I can't find it, then there's got to be other people who are looking for this thing. And if I can heal, I have to provide that thing. I have to provide my story. And yeah, I feel like a lot of people have reached out to me and said, your story is the first one where I've ever felt seen, which is so important and key to me. And I think a lot of people have also been more comfortable identifying as having CPTSD and joining that community and like self-diagnosing themselves through my book, which I actually had that experience recently reading Disability Visibility and Year of the Tiger, actually, where I did not necessarily see myself as disabled until reading those books and until actually reading essays by people with hypermobility in disability visibility who are struggling through the exact same things I was, and going like, oh, wow, wait a minute. And then having to parse through like, wait, do I deserve to use the word disabled? What does that mean? What does it, am I fairly representing it if I call myself disabled, and sort of grappling with that. And I never would have been able to do that and also join this larger community that I find so welcoming and warm if it hadn't been for Alice's important work. And so I feel like she is truly so valuable and revolutionary, even in my own life.
That's incredible. I feel like we have to end soon, which is so sad. But maybe as just a last thing, would you both talk about one more thing you loved about the book that we haven't covered yet, in a short amount of time, if that's not too much of a thing to spring on you both?
There's a conversation. This is not like the most sexy thing that I love necessarily about the book, but there's a conversation about SFSU and the difficulty of housing in it. In the book, it's a conversation. And we were talking about systems earlier and the difficulty that disability can create when you're trying to exist in these systems. And the difficulty of housing and accessible housing was so interesting to me and really lit a fire in me. I really enjoyed is a weird word, but I really enjoyed that conversation.
I think one of the things that I love the most about it are the last few pages, actually, which I don't think are a spoiler, are so optimistic. She writes about her hopes for the future and her dreams and the things that she wants to accomplish. And I think when you're disabled and you get information that you have like a potentially shortened lifespan, it can be so scary and demoralizing, and it limits your hope. And I think it's revolutionary and so exciting how she dares to just be like, fuck you, I'm gonna change the world. And I'm so excited about it, and here's why. And yeah, I love that part of the book.
Yeah, it's I'm gonna change the world, and then also proof that I already have, motherfuckers. It's perfect. I think on that note, that was a brilliant way to end this conversation. Thank you both for being part of this with me. Thank you, Alice, for bringing us together for this, and thank you for everyone at the Longmore Institute on Disability for organizing this. And read the book; it's really incredible. Go get it. It's out now. Thank you.
Well, that's a perfect segue because 10 people are going to win Alice's book right now, and 5 people are going to win each of, 15 total books from our panelists today. So woohoo, we get to have our like Oprah giveaway moment here at the Longmore Institute. So I am going to share my screen and spotlight, and we're going to read everyone's names aloud for access. And in doing that, I have to give a big shout out to our captioners and interpreters because there's no way to prep these names in advance. So it's about to be a heavy finger spelling moment. So we'll take our time with it. So the winners of What My Bones Know are, and apologies in advance, I will most definitely butcher some of these names, but I'll try my hardest. Sherilyn Crowther, Heather Sessler, Kaylin Phillips, Melissa Hill, and Sally Hessler. Congrats to our winners. We'll move on to the next one. And thank you to our Longmore fellow, Katie, who's helping post these in the chat and who has also been an access support today. The winners of the collected schizophrenia essays, Yvonne Liu, Ruth Cho, Melissa Allison, Kayri C., and Helen Rotier or Rotier. Congratulations. The winners of Goodbye Again, Jamel Williams, Kristen Vogel, Michelle X, San Lu, and Zinat Hassan. And our big giveaway of 10 books. The winners of Year of the Tiger, Sierra Marie Gerfau, R.A., Melissa Hung, Lavi Kakol, Kathleen, oops, I can't see the name quite right because of the captions. Kathleen, no, I can't see. Kathleen Merrick, it'll be in the chat. J. K. Halani Kawanwi, sorry. L. Gibbs, Catherine Klotzker, Andrew Pucci, Tasneem Sa, and that name I missed was Kathleen Mozak. Apologies there. So if you were one of the winners of our book giveaway, we are going to share a link in the chat, and there is a form that you can fill out to provide your information. We, of course, will get you the book in whatever form is accessible to you. So you can mark that there, provide your address. And you can also let us know if you do not need a copy of the book, and we will donate it further on and make sure that that book still reaches the hands of somebody who deserves that book. We are so grateful to all of you for being here today, and we hope you will join us for our next Tiger Talk event on October 12th. The title of this program is called The Lyrical Labor of Loving Disabled Bodies, a Portal to Access Intimacy. And you can register for that at tinyurl.com/Tiger Talks October 12th. So if you're a book winner, we hope to hear from you soon. We'll send out the Q&A once again if you weren't able to access it. We'll share this video as soon as it's available. It'll take us a little bit to get the captions available. And we'll be adding you to our listserv so that you get the video, but our feelings will not be hurt if you unsubscribe and you weren't interested in that. But we'll also keep you posted on the other programs that are coming in this 4-part series. So thank you once again for being here, and thank you to our speakers for joining us, who are all beautifully holding up and plugging Alice's book in all 3 windows right now. Thank you all.